This is one of my favourite ever paintings. In fact, it's one of the very first ones I ever taught in a class. But how long ago was that? Want to know? Sit tight. I'll rewind the clock, but maybe not back to when I first painted this. I'd be in shorts. I'd have more hair. Hello, welcome back to the studio. Well, as you see, I got my canvas set up already. This is portrait style, in other words, upright. It's a 16" by 20, and it's all ready to go for this little painting. This is another Bob Ross classic called Glacier Lake. It's one of my favourites, and I think it's one of the first paintings I ever taught many, many years ago. I just love it. That whole mountain feature, just wonderful. An amazing sky and some lovely fluffy clouds. But let's stop talking and let's get on with some painting. Sit tight. Well, one of the first things I did to get my painting underway was to put in these matte pins, and I just used one of my Bob Ross brushes here, and I measured up. I used the whole of the handle and the little metal bezel, and I put a pin in at either side. This gives me the horizon line. Above this it will be mountains, sky and the midground, and below I'm going to have some water and some reflections. The next thing I want to do is to give my canvas a thin even coat of this product. This is Bob Ross liquid white oil paint. This will keep my canvas wet and workable, so I can blend colour onto here directly. It means I can make some mistakes and make some sort of changes. I can rub things out, because this will stop my canvas from grabbing the paint too hard. So that's the first step. Let's get liquid white onto the canvas. I keep some in a little airtight pot, and this, yes, I store in the freezer. It doesn't actually freeze it. What it does is it just sort of suspends its drying time. It can happily sit there in the freezing cold for weeks or months, and it won't dry out. Now, as you scrub with a twirl, you can see I'm working on a grey canvas, so what I'm doing on here shows up. And as I put it on here nice and thin, what I want you to do is be able to test it with your fingertips and touch the canvas, and then look at your fingers and see if you've got any paint coming back. That doesn't look like quite enough. Something like that is what we're really looking for. So that's how much we want to put on all over the canvas. And it's important, once you've covered everything, to finish off with some nice long strokes just to even out the surface. So if there's any bits that are extra wet, spread them about. And of course, it's a fingertip test. As you see, I got some pretty nice results here. That one looks a little dry, that one too, but not bad, I think, overall. So here's my palette, and as you see, I've started off with just a few colours for the basic sky and the mountain. Titanium white, phthalo blue, Prussian blue and some black. And of course, always I want to start with the thing furthest away, which is the sky. I also want to use this brush again, but of course it's covered in liquid white. So make sure you give this a bit of a dry clean, because you don't want to put all that liquid white through your paint. So looking at the reference photograph and reading the instructions, Bob says just use phthalo blue for the sky, but that's black, I think, even Prussian blue. So I think I have to tone my canvas down with a little bit more colour. So let's kick off and do a copy of this painting rather than what's in the instructions. Now, I'm going to start off with the phthalo blue colour as suggested, and I'm going to just touch my brush into it and pull it down. Notice I always tend to aim for my thumb. That way I'm not sort of covering up the other colours. I can pull them into play. Just going to load my brush and give it a good old tap. That means any sort of lumps of paint are broken up through the bristles. And out of habit, I always start in my corners, because if it's too strong anywhere, I want it up there too strong and not sort of right in the middle of my painting. So there's my sky, and my brush is running out of paint. As you see, it's gone darker and it's gone paler, which is what we want. We want it to be lighter at the horizon line. But I want to put some nice big fluffy white clouds in here, so let's make a little white fluffy cloud out of this little piece of paper towel. And as you see, against the blue colour, it shows up. But if you put your little white fluffy cloud down here, you see the background doesn't have enough colour. and this cloud just disappears. So the trick is to remember where your cloud's going to be and make sure you've got a good enough strength of colour. So I'm going to give that a little bit more pressure on the brush and sort of scare a bit more colour out of it. So I think my sky's okay. Now I want to do some water, and I'm going to start down in the bottom corner again, and this time I'm going to lay my brush flat. I'm going to pull in edge to centre and lift off with a little flourish. I'm going to come from the other side as well. There's nothing worse than when you see the water sort of doing that sort of shape, all sort of dipping down in the centre. That looks a little odd. So always make sure you go as level as you can. And I'll finish that off with a few flat strokes. But I've saved this little light area through the centre there, maybe a reflection from the sky. Let's try a little black. Again, just brush mix this. And let's hit those corners again. I think I'll add a little bit more on the other corner as well. And top tip here, always take time to do this stage, because once you start putting features on here, you can't get rid of any marks so easily. So I always take a few minutes to do this. I brush it across. Dry clean my brush, stand back. I think I'm good. I might spend just a few more minutes just going across this a couple of times. If you see any marks like that, what you're seeing there is the studio lights are catching the paintbrush marks, but there's actually no white being applied. It's just literally where the brush stroke is just picked up by the lights. Now, before we go throwing on clouds everywhere, let's take a moment to plan things a little bit more, because, well, you know, I like to plan where I'm going. I don't like some sort of nasty surprises halfway through my painting. So let's think about where we need to make an allowance for this sort of mountain. So I know that there's quite a big sort of section here, and it's going to come across to about there. You see, I'm just going to use my palette knife just to sort of scratch on a bit of a design. I know that picks up on the camera, but there you go, scratched off a little bit more. So I'm sort of just taking this whole sort of corner here. Now, I've made it probably a little smaller than it's going to be. It's probably going to grow a little bit because, well, that's painting for you. And I'm going to add another little peak in here. There's a little piece of rock sticking out there. So we know this whole section here is going to be taken up with the mountain section. So we've only got this sort of corner to worry about for the clouds. It's just a little bit of planning. So I put out a small amount of red, and I'm going to take just a hint of that on the tips of my brush, then go into some white. I don't want this to be pink, but I want it to be sort of just off-white. The reason I want this is because if I touch the canvas, which has got some blue on it, with a little tiny touch of white with red in it, I'll get some nice lavender tones, so my clouds will get some shadows in them. But as I said, I don't want bright pink sky, so I'm being very minimal. Now, it might look as though that's quite pink, but I know when I touch the canvas, it'll look white. So think about the bright outside edge first, and just tap. Just make that nice sort of connection to the edge of the canvas. Reload. And think about maybe adding another little sort of bump of cloud in here. And just keep a check on roughly where the outline of that mountain is going to be. And as you see, I'm just going to really hit that canvas hard. Give it a little bit of a pound, but save that little silver lining. Let's throw some of the blue colour into this. Already there's a sort of a lavender kind of colour there. Maybe I'll put a little bit more. Can you see that? Sort of a soft pinky lavender colour. Lovely. Perfect for a little mountain scene. I'm just sort of doing one nice big cloud here. I'm just going to let the paint run out a little bit. And I don't mind too much if I lose the edge of my little Glacier Lake painting there. If I want to lose any of these edges a little more, just dry clean my brush, get rid of some of that paint. I can always just soften them up just a touch more. Now back in here. It's not quite bright enough, is it? I need a little bit more white. Get that a little tiny bit brighter. Where I've still got my old brush, which has got some black on it. So, for instance, if I wanted to change this, I could easily do it. I could pick up some of that shadow colour, go back, and just knock that out. Sometimes when you do this, you kind of just let the paint sort of run and do its own thing. You create the most beautiful scenes without really trying too hard. That cloud. So there you see, I made a quick change by painting. Didn't take but a second to do. Quick dry clean of my brush. Let's just finish it off with some long flat strokes. And here you see I'm using just the side of my brush. Absolutely no pressure on those bristles. I just let the brush float. Literally the weight of the brush is what I'm looking for here. There we go. Quick as that. Some lovely clouds. I'll fool with this a little bit more and we'll come back in a second. For my mountain, I want to mix up a nice sort of cracky dark colour, which is going to be black and a little touch of Prussian blue. So take a nice amount of that black and a little of the Prussian blue, and don't overdo it on the blue colour. We want this to be much more to the black side. If you want to pick up a nice neat little roll of paint, you can only really do it when your paint is laid down flat, and then I like to just slide my knife back up into the paint, and that way I can see just how much paint I'm collecting on my palette knife, and I make sure I've got not too much or too little. Let's drop in this first sort of craggy peak over here on the right hand side, and there's going to be 1, 2 over here, so it's definitely your bravery test. And I'm really pushing this down into my painting. And I don't really mind if I get a little bit of that blue colour coming through from the background. It just adds to the whole effect. Now, where Bob did his original, he used a 1-inch brush or a 2-inch brush, and he wheeled it through some titanium white paint. He had a ton of paint on his brush, but I think it's a little overkill for what I'm using today. So you have a choice really of fans or filberts. And again, this doesn't have to be pure white. In fact, it won't stay white for very long because I'm actually going to be just touching the edge of that little rocky outcrop there. Let's think about that. Press and pull. And I'm going to pick up some of this nice blue colour on my snow as well. There we go. Need a little bit more paint on my brush, I think. Kinda can't be helped. Now you also see why having a little bit more of a blue-grey colour in the background here will help my snow show up as well. Again, I slide up and pick up a little roll of paint, and I want to just tuck it in there. Sort of fit into the edge of this peak. Come in, just grab a little of that rock there, a little dark colour, not too much. pull that across, so you get this kind of nice sort of layering effect here. Here's a challenge, isn't it? I've got quite a light fluffy cloud here and a bit of white snow here that I want to show up. I could fight all day long to try and make that show up. Here's a neat little trick. Pick up a little bit of the colour of that rock. And I'll use that to make a shadow. So it looks like that little rock is casting a shadow onto the snow. Isn't it sneaky? So if you can't make the light colour show up, do the opposite. Put a little shadow in there. So I am going to pick up a little colour on my brush. Is that enough of a difference, do you think? That's highlight. So this wants to be shadow, wants to be a little darker. I don't think it quite is. Now it is. This painting takes a little planning, because there's lots of other little bits of rock that have got to come into here for this painting. There's another little piece of rock here. So it's easy to get a bit carried away. If you're not sure, you can always scratch in a few little designs as you go to remind you to put details into your painting so that you won't forget them. So there's two little rocks there. There's a little something that's supposed to be on the side here, if I'm following Bob's design. So my mountain's coming along quite nicely. I got myself into a bit of a pickle here, didn't I? I put this rock in before I put the snow in here, so it's easy for even me to go out of sort of position on things. So do take care to work in sort of layers and try and think logically as you're doing this. The other thing you might notice, there's also a little hint of blue now. I stood back and I realised that the whole scene was just really much too grey. I just wanted a touch of that blue colour from the sky, so I just put a little bit more of the Russian blue into my shadow mixture here, and you can see that all I do for my shadow snow is I just run my brush into some of this and just pick up a little bit of this blue-grey colour, and I went back over a few little edges and just touched in a little bit of a blue-grey colour as opposed to just straight grey, and I think it gives my painting a little bit more character. And again, this is highlight coming this way, so it should be in shadow on this left hand side, and it's really much more of just a suggestion of some snow here. But isn't this a lovely mountain scene? It's really just one of those paintings you just want to sort of play with. Well, as you see, after I sort of turned the cameras off and carried on painting, I got a little carried away, and I started developing this. It looks just like a whole new painting now. It's something completely different. And once again, paintings evolve. They tend to sort of take on a bit of a life of their own. I'm just still using my little fill brush just to sort of lay in some nice thick snow. And again, just let the brush bump and just leave a nice sort of layer of snow on your painting, and come back and add in all sorts of little doers and just kind of let the brush do its thing. And you will be amazed at the amount of fantastic detail you can include in a painting if you just don't try too hard. Well, here's my painting so far, and I've got to say, that's rather a nice mountain. But I am running into a little bit of a problem, which you might have seen. See, I started having a little bit too much fun. I started adding things into my painting that started to bring the mountain further and further forward in the painting. By making these quite bold and detailed and bright, I start to lose that depth of field or the distance in my painting. Now, there is a little bit of a challenge with this size of a canvas, you see, because if I show you Bob's original one, his was on an 18 by 24. So in other words, he had like a couple of more inches across the sides this way, but he had 4 inches further to move everything further up. I'm on a 16 by 20, which means that, well, okay, so I've lost a couple of inches on the width that way, but I've lost 4 inches, which means that instead of being able to slide this further up the canvas and gain a little bit more distance in my painting, it all ends up looking a bit too close to me. This is something which you have to keep in mind when you're painting sometimes, that the proportions of your canvas may vary from your reference. So bear that one in mind. You can get yourself into a little bit of, well, one of those pickles. So what do I do? Well, I suppose the purist would say, scrape all this off, make this much more sort of subdued and sort of fuzzy and less sort of like in your face to get a little bit more distance back. I rather like it though, and I think I'm going to keep it. I'm just going to sort of paint what I think looks like it's going to fit. So I'm going to put in a few little trees here. I might have to lose Bob's little distant waterfall because I think that's in the wrong spot for my painting. But once again, you have to be adaptable when you paint. You don't have to stick to exactly what you see in the reference photograph or even what Bob did. Paint what suits you. Now, let's put in some distant trees and try and make them fit in with the scale that we have. To try and get some sense of depth and distance into my painting, I'm going to put in some of those little distant trees. Now, Bob, I think, got in about, say, 3 or maybe even 4 layers in here. I'm probably maybe get 2, so let's see how we do. I'm going to back to my palette, and you see I've had a bit of a tidy up and gathered up all my mountain colour there, the darks, the blues, a little bit of the white, and I'm going to go back to my sand brush, add a bit more white into that. I want these trees to look fairly distant, and load your brush and give it a really good wiggle. Okay, now then, let's have an exploratory tap, because these are going to be those little sort of spiky trees that sit in the background. And what we do is we just tip the handle up on end and we tap and let it sort of skid. I'm going to make a mistake along here just to show you what can happen. Now, I think the colour's not bad. And if I was to carry on filling that in, I'd end up with what would look like a very neat little hedge. You see, everything all at the same size, all at the same sort of scale. And it would look a little bit too sort of neat and uniform. Now, if I said change it, what most people might be tempted to do is something like that. So we go up and down, up and down, up and down. And again, a little bit too neat and tidy. So vary the colours a little bit. And what I like to try and do is, before I get to this stage, is to put in what I call a couple of markers. In other words, to put in a couple of, this is my tallest one here. Maybe have another marker there and another marker there, so I can see already that I've got some way of planning out where I'm going to be. So I've got some taller ones and some lower ones, and this gives me an idea of where I'm going to be working. So I'm not just hitting and hoping, and again just tapping, let the brush skid a little, and they're all going to fall on the line of that mountain there. So again, I am deliberately going to paint through that line and then come down inside the line of the mountain. There you go. Now, I don't know if I need all of these trees, but I'm putting in a little bit of colour here just to sort of finish things off. And let's see how loosely you can paint these. You can really be bit rough with it and just kind of smash them out, and they work just as well. Got a nice clean dry 1-inch brush here, and I'm going to simply create a little bit of a misty effect here, and not just go straight across. When you go up and down into these trees, so again you're not creating a straight cut off, you're creating a series of dips and rises. Tap your brush into a little dirty white. Wow, look at that. Isn't that cool? And give a few little upward flicks as well. Get rid of that chunky monkey there. Just to kind of go back over this just for a second, these are going to be reflected down in the water, and this isn't going to be reflected because there's a land mass here. So what I did is I just took a little bit more of that white colour on my 1-inch brush and introduced a sort of a little bit of a misty layer there between the trees in the background and the edge of the water. And I suppose I should have really put the misty effect in and then done the trees down below, but I had the brush in my hand and I got carried away, so I just did the two. Just got to do the reflections. And for that we just put our brush firmly on the canvas, give it a little wiggle, give it a little downward flick. The little wiggle is important because what it does is it sort of presses the bristles sort of into the canvas and cuts through the paint. It gives you a nice sort of line to follow. Give it a little flick. Dry clean my 1-inch brush and then gently go across, edge to centre. The reason why I say that is if you come the other way and start off, it's a little bit harder, go the other way, you leave a mark in the water that's very hard to get rid of. Now I had a little stand back, and from the other side of the room you can almost make out some land in here. It wasn't supposed to really be there, it was just supposed to be a waterline, but now I'm looking a little more closely. I think there's a chance if I take just a little bit more white paint on my brush, I could just tap in a distant riverbank. See, there you go. Always looking and see what you can add to your painting. Try and get this to sort of drop a little further on this side of my paint, so it looks like it sort of curves off and around, and as it goes back up under the trees into the mist, I'm just going to let the paint run out. So I'm going to take my palette knife, just going to rub it into some of that paint, get a little tiny roll on the edge of the palette knife, and then between the land and the little reflection here, I'm just going to drop in the suggestion of a waterline. A lot of pressure on the knife, just push it in really firm and slide. And as I'm going sort of slightly downhill, you have to come down in steps. If you have waterlines that run at angles, they look a little odd. So I'm going to do that one as a little step down. Now let's think about adding one last layer of trees here, and I think we have to start thinking about adding a little hint of green to it because it wants to look like it's coming forward in the painting. So I've added a little touch of sap green into my grey colour, and I darkened it up with a little bit more of the black colour here because I want quite a nice sort of dark green tone. Again, I didn't bother dry cleaning my brush, I just went straight into that colour, and again I want just some of this style of tree, but maybe it looks like it's a tiny bit close to, so we're just starting to see the first touches of colour. And in here you can borrow a tree from the background if it looks like it should be more in the foreground. You can borrow and bring it forwards a little bit, but I don't think I have to. But I might borrow one or two of these. So you can just start seeing the hint of green coming through. Now if I stop there, it looked like it's really sort of clinging to the edge a little bit too much here. So here's where we have to sort of be a little bit more decisive and sort of bring it across. And now I'm losing a few water lines, that's okay. I want some nice strong reflections. If I tap on some white through there, I'm probably not going to get this nice misty effect. I might just get a sort of funny green fog. So you have to be careful not to try doing this effect on green colours. They don't tend to work so well. But once again, I'm going to do that little press, wiggle, a little downward flick. Okay, come down a little bit more of a wiggle. Drop it down a little bit. Just go across. Oh, I got a bit of a chunky monkey there, didn't I? That is caused by little bobbles of paper towel breaking off and getting caught in the bristles of your brush. Let's knock that out. And I'll cover it up with a very sneaky waterline. Let's move on to this part of our painting. We've got some nice big fir trees coming through here and some land. For my land mass over here on the right hand side, I need to mix up a bit more of a good strong dark colour. Now this has got sap green and greys and all sorts of things mixed into it, so it's a little bit sort of, well, a bit murky really. So let's get rid of that and start off with some fresh colour. Prussian blue, a nice amount of black, some Van Dyke brown, and maybe some alizarin crimson. So there's my nice dark green colour, and I've gone back to my old Bob Ross 1-inch brush for this part of my painting. Now, a good amount of this dark green colour onto your brush, and think about the shape of the land that's coming into the painting. Now, Bob had room for some reflections here, which I don't think we're going to have in our painting, so I think about sort of coming in a nice sort of shallow angle here, tapping. Now, I want to probably go just past the halfway mark, come off so that there's sort of a nice sort of natural sort of crossover between the distance and the foreground. And I'm just going to tap this on a little bit of pressure, get a nice dark green underpainting. Now, I swung my camera around to the side so you get a good shot of what I'm doing here. Again, I'm using my fan brush, just dry cleaned it. I'm going to go through that lovely dark green colour. I want to think about painting maybe just a little group of fir trees in the background here, and have a couple of bigger ones through the foreground. So let's just do some positions first. So I'm just going to tap on the centre line of the fir tree, because if I know where the centres are, then I can sort of space them as I want. And I'm going to have, maybe 3 back in here. Then that leaves me room for a couple of nice bigger ones here. Now you can decide to have downy trees, which use the shape of the fan brush, so they kind of droop down, or you can tip the brush up, and you have what I call uppy fan brush trees. So they kind of the branches sort of shape upwards. I don't know which ones I prefer more. Probably downward facing ones in his painting. So maybe I'll do that as well. So just get it on the corner, drop your hand down a little bit, and just start off by putting just a few little bars across the centre of the tree. And this is just tapping on and off, on and off. And think about each of these being like a little umbrella shape. And as they grow towards the ground, they get a little bigger. Same thing on a corner, drop the handle down. Just do a few little touches to get those initial bars going. And then just press. Let the brush make the shape of the tree. And they're standing close to each other, so one crosses the other on the corner. Now, if you find you can't get the shape working well, this is a neat little trick. Just do a little sort of skinny tree. Get the center line in. Okay. And then you can go back and add the outward branches a little more. And that way you can sort of pick the spot. You don't have to worry about zigzagging, trying to do everything all at once. You can just try and get the center line in first. I don't know about you, but I'm not that keen on seeing that little bit of blue on the edge there. So I am going to just drop in a little half tree. I want to bring a nice big old tree right through there. There's not a lot of paint here. This is just basically a very pale blue colour, so I won't have to fight my way through a lot of thick paint. If I made that tree my main tree, I've got to fight through all of this heavy paint. So by putting it just here, I avoid all those problems. Now some might say that was a little bit of luck. You might be right. There we go. It's a big old tree. I'll give my little friend to the left here. I think we're going to have one just there. And let's see what those two look like. If you want to just do a few little bars to start with, just to sort of get the feel for it. Drop in the center. I want you to listen to the sound my brush makes, because the sound of the brush tells you what it's doing. You should hear a nice sort of crunching sound. If it doesn't make any sort of sound, it means you're brushing it on and not pressing it on. I'm going to take my microphone off and I'm going to put it right up close to the painting. You can hear this. That's my microphone. Can you hear that? That's what we want to hear. We want to hear that lovely sound of the brush crunching on the canvas. I don't think I need another one. I think that's going to be enough. To finish off this lovely grassy area at the base of my fir trees, I've got out some nice cadmium yellow, touch of sap green, touch of Indian yellow. I may not need ochre for my painting in the end, but I'm going to use my Bob Ross brush. You see I've got my logo showing, which is the way I tend to always hold my brush, and I'm just going to pull my paint together here. Take a little bit of Indian yellow into it as well, so I've got a nice variety of colours. And notice how I push my brush back up into the paint. So I make a sort of curtain of colour, and then press and push, slide my brush up, make a line in the paint, and I have the same little line of paint on the very edge of my brush. See if I can get you a nice close-up of that. There you are, a nice close-up showing you the edge of my brush. Nice line of paint. So now the light is coming from the right-hand side, so I probably want to favour a little bit more brightness on the right. Although, to be honest, it's not too important for this particular painting. You'll see how that little bright edge really shows up. And sort of think about the lay of the land, how it comes down to the water's edge. Always start at the top and then work your way away from the fir trees, so you're not sort of going back over the work you've just done. Right, let's highlight these fir trees. Going to give my little fir trees a tree trunk. I've got some rather grubby looking white here, it's got a little bit of yellow through it, and I've got a little touch of dark sienna. Just make a nice marble mix. There we go. I don't really care if it's got yellow through it, absolutely fine. Get a small roll of paint, and we're just going to do the centre line. Just touch. Some fresh cad yellow, a little touch of sap green, and just load the brush, but just pressing into the paint. You just want to drive a little bit of paint onto the very edge of the brush. Once again, just touch gently here and there. Now, if you find the colours not coming off very well, in other words, I'm picking up more than I'm dropping off, it means that my cad yellow is too close in terms of thickness. In fact, this colour underneath here, the dark green colour, is almost the same thickness as my highlight colour, so I need to add a drop or two of thinners. So there's a top tip. If it won't come off, add a touch of thinners. There you go, drop of thinners. My paint looks a little bit less stiff and dry, looks a little bit sort of wetter. Let's see if that comes off. As I come down to the bottom of my tree, I let the paint run out. As Bob would say, darker, darker, darker. These little ones at the background here, I'm going to give them just a touch. If you haven't got a very nice point to your tree, you can always run your knife the centre there, put the little aerial up. There we go. And of course, scratchy sticks and twigs. I'll put some little sticks and twigs on the edge here of the water. And of course, the very last thing to do, some red paint, is to sign my painting. So there you have it, Glacier Lake, a Bob Ross classic that captured my heart over 20 years ago, and I think it will do the same for you too. Now, don't move, because there's some more lovely videos to watch coming right along. Happy painting, people!